Good evening. We have Sowmya with us today, and she will be presenting to us on mediated language learning. Before we start, basically mediated learning experience, I'm sorry. Before we start with the presentation, let me just introduce Sowmya. Sowmya is a co-founder of Five, which was incorporated in September 2005. And she had a chain of pediatric centers in Chennai and Bangalore. She has worked in National Health Service and Hope Center for Cognitive Education in London. She has conducted various international specialized seminars, workshops, certificate programs with reputed professionals and organizations across the globe. The most important aspect now is she's a co-host for professional SLP certifications in India by the Hannon Center, Canada. She is currently also the speaker for the Hannon Center's university program across India. Her experiences involve, basically her certification involves most of the certification from the Hannon Center, Canada. That is, It Takes Two to Talk, More Than Words, Talkability, Learning Language and Loving It, Spark Communication, ABC and Beyond, Target Word. And apart from that, she's also done the sensory integration and praxis test certificate program of the University of Southern California. Her list is quite elaborative, and I don't think I'll be able to do justice reading it. But over to you, Sowmya, on mediated learning experience for the day.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on a Saturday evening. I know it's a very challenging time. It's 4 as well. It's, I don't know if some of you are missing your afternoon naps or, getting back from work, but thank you for being here and, giving me this opportunity to share what I have learned. I'll share my screen, and if you can tell me if you can see it well enough.
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah?
Not yet, Sowmya. Just, I think, half of the
Yeah,
screen.
we can see it.
We can see it, yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, the topic, I picked is mediated learning experience. It's something that I, in fact, started off my career with, and I'm really grateful that, I got to know about this as soon as I got out there in the field and learned. And that's why I'm very, I'm as passionate about mediated learning experience as most of you think I am about Hannon. And in fact, this is also one of the reasons why I sort of gravitated towards the Hannon, and I was so taken into the Hannon principles, because they sort of align a lot. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. Just to quickly ask, you can maybe put it in the chat box, and maybe Preeja can help me, get responses from the chat box. How many of you are aware of mediated learning experience? Do we have any responses? No? Yes? Anyone? Okay. I'm going to take that as a no.
Not many, Sowmya. Yes, you're audible. Not many of them know about it. So
yeah, that's a tricky part about these online webinars. As much as we're trying to get used to it, nothing like the face-to-face, but we'll do what we can. And so mediated learning experience is something I want to share about. Namita talked about it a little bit in her session 2 weeks ago. So I'll just maybe get into it a little more. We only have an hour. I can go on and on talking about it, but I really want to share this with you so that maybe you go back wanting to learn more about it and thinking about how it may be relevant to the SLP practice and the work that we do. So I'm Sowmya, by a professional speech language pathologist. So Emily and me. So how did I get into this? In 2001, when I was 99, 2000, when I was doing my master's dissertation, I did it in learning disabilities, and I was really hooked in. So I was toggling between autism and learning disabilities at that point got my attention more. So for my dissertation, I had approached Mrs. Lalita Ramanujam in Chennai. She runs the Alpha to Omega Learning Center for data collection. And a few interactions with her, and I realized that one, I was hooked in more into learning disabilities. I wanted to know more about it. And, in exchange for helping me with data collection, she asked me to work with her for a year. And I quite readily agreed. And I think that was the best decision of my life. It really changed a lot of things for me. So in 2001, when I finished my master's and I thought I was equipped enough to offer my services to the school, I joined them, and I very quickly realized that if anything, I was barely equipped. I really didn't have enough. I maybe had some theoretical knowledge, but I just didn't know. So maybe I knew the what of it, but I just didn't know how to go about it, and how was I going to, work on this large diagnosis of learning disabilities and all that the children with learning disabilities throw at us. And that's when Mrs. Lalita Ramanjan introduced me to, Emily, and opened the world of Emily. It just didn't change the way I worked, but it just changed my entire perspective, and it changed my way of being, if I can say that. And I think that's why I'm very keen on, going and, wanting to share that with all of you. So it just changed the way I started to look at things, to approach things, to begin to connect to things. So it was not just about children with learning disabilities. I started using it across, my field of work, even with adults, with children, with stroke patients. I mean, I started, finding it impactful in any interaction that I had with people around me, with family, with anyone. So I think it's something that's definitely relevant to speech language, practice. And I would really love for you to just have a thought about it. So this is May 5. And as you can see, our tagline is enabling happy connections, because I think that's what all of us want to do. We want to create more and more happy connections, whether it's with family, it's with friends, it's with the children we work with the families of children we work with, because we all want a happy experience, and we all want to build those happy experiences that we may want to revisit. And I think that's what Emily also sort of got me thinking about. And, where eventually when I started 5, I thought that was the, most appropriate tagline that suited the work I want to do, which was enabling happy connections across the spectrum of work that we do. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Vygotsky's work and, his theory of social cultural cognitive development. So he talked about how human mental and cognitive abilities are shaped and created by language. So we know that language is cognition, and the more we think, we're using language to think. He also he was one of the first ones who started talking about mediation, how important it is, and how as children or as developing individuals, we learn more with the interactions that we have with the people around us. And of course, the zone of proximal stability in terms of what a child can do and what the child cannot do, and what he can do if he is helped by a person, and if that person gives the child the tools to learn. So bridging that gap between what the child can and cannot do by having a mediator there. And he also talked about the importance of play and how children stretch their concepts, what that they learn, and begin to use that to understand the world around them and further their learning. So this was, some of the work that Emily was sort of based around, but almost 30 years later. Okay, before that, in relevance to Vygotsky's work, again, everyone's familiar with scaffolding. I just wanted to quickly run through a couple of the techniques. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm sure most of you are doing it in their practice. So we do use scaffolding by asking prompting questions. We try to help the child by making suggestions, giving hints, providing activities just above their ability, show and tell, build off their prior knowledge. We get them to think out loud, again, using all that's stuck in their head, trying to get them to use that to understand and learn what they're doing. Pre-teach vocabulary. We adjust to learning style of the child, and we try to encourage metacognition, that is thinking about thinking. So almost 30 years later comes Professor Ruben Feuerstein, and he was a clinical and developmental and cognitive psychologist. And he actually started his work with immigrants who came from the Holocaust, and were moving into the new state of Israel. And at that time, what was happening was that they had recognized that they wanted to build a very strong nation. So they wanted to have very, very competitive, very, intelligent, very capable citizens. So they had very modern way of education. And a lot of the immigrants who came in because they came from different backgrounds, different cultural upbringings, different, disadvantaged conditions, a lot of head injuries or, emotional stress. So I think now with all that we see in the news, we know what kind of, mental and physical trauma children of immigrants can go through. So he started looking at these children and how to integrate them into the state that Israel was, building for themselves. And he realized that the testing that they were expected to do just did not suit these children because they didn't have the same advantages as the other children. They had a lot of gaps in, the exposure that they had and the learning that they had. So then the standardized tests that were used to integrate these kids into the school system or, into society was just not applicable at all. So that's when he thought about coming up with something where instead of looking at what they can do, we start looking at what are they able to do and what is their learning potential like? What are they capable of learning when presented the material in a way that makes sense to them? So that's how he started to think about this whole, concept. And he started thinking about dynamic assessments, which, Namita talked about 2 weeks ago. And he started looking at how can we use these dynamic assessments to understand the learning potential of the child, and then use that information to understand how to work with this child and how to help the child become a more independent learner and thinker. So he believed that intelligence is not a static structure, but an open dynamic system that can continue to develop throughout life. So he came up with a theory of structural cognitive modifiability, that about neural plasticity, that change can happen at any stage of life. And the theory of, structural cognitive modifiability, it equips the learner for a deeper understanding. So it's more about the process than whether the child completed the task or not, how quickly they were able to do it. It was more about how did the child approach the activity? How did the child approach the task? Was the child able to use rules and principles from their past experience? And were they able to, use the knowledge they were gaining now to develop new tools for learning, which they can use on their own later? So this is what he was constantly looking at. And this is what he was talking about when he said that intelligence is not static, it is dynamic. It constantly changes depending on the opportunities provided, the learning opportunities provided to the individual. So everything, he started to base it on this concept of structural cognitive modifiability. And he believed that learning happens through ways, which I'm sure, again, many of you are, familiar with. One is direct exposure to the stimuli. So say a child, bumps into a table and then the child realizes that, oops, not happening. I shouldn't bump in. So direct experience, the child learns, and then the child modifies their behavior the next time. And then the second one is learning through a mediator. So which happens with a lot of our children. They don't realize that, he got hurt because he bumped into our table and he might run back right into that table again. Or, we have a lot of children who don't, understand obstacles, or, they have very poor motor planning. So for these children is where we need a mediator to help them understand what happened, raise the child's awareness of the situation, help the child to develop their own problem-solving skills, coping mechanisms, and come up with their own way to understand what do I need to do when I come across the situation next. And this is true with most of the children that we work with. They have very limited ability to learn through direct exposure. If they did and if they could, they wouldn't need us. So Emily, which is mediated learning experience, aims to enhance independent learning and thinking, promote metacognition. We will talk a lot about thinking, and you will see that as we go along. And eventually reducing the dependence on mediation. In fact, this is not just for children of, with special needs, the children that we work with. I think it's applicable to everything, applicable to everyone, that, we all start to use our knowledge and skills for further learning and further development. And when it comes to a point where we are stuck, we look for help, we seek help. It's just that we know to do it, and most of our children do not know how to do it. So what's mediated experience? So Feuerstein coined this term to describe the unique mentor and mentee, which is the mediator and the individual's interaction. What happens between the learner and the mediator? And how is that, important in improving the individual's propensity, which is a potential to learn. And this happens by the mediator not giving answers, but by the mediator enabling the learner to become more aware of their own cognitive abilities, their own cognitive processes, the way they understand information, for them to build their own strategies and to develop learning behavior that they might use for, again, further learning. So the mediator is the person who interposes themselves between the child and the stimuli. So we said that table and chair, child example. The child just didn't get it that, he was getting hurt because he was bumping into the table. So then the mediator interposes themselves between the stimuli and the child. And in order to, this helps for the child to assimilate stimuli and start to internalize that, structure. So if you just say, no, don't run towards the table. Oh, no, they will wait for that, for us to say, okay, if they say no, I shouldn't do that. But then if no one says anything, I just keep going at it. So it also happens a lot with, the children that we work with, that they wait for that prompt, they wait for that instruction. So the mediator selects, frames, organizes, and schedules the appearance of the stimuli. How is that information or activity or toy presented to the child is something that the mediator would design. And so while doing that, you might pay more attention to some stimuli, and while you might ignore some of it. That would depend on the situation and the goals of interaction. So again, we have a lot of our children who have attention deficit, and they sort of get distracted and pay attention to everything. So as a mediator, how do we get them to pick the information that they need to pay attention to and ignore the rest of the information? Having talked about mediators, parents by default become first mediators because they are the people who introduce the world to the child, who are there with the child when the child is having a lot of these different experiences. And in these cases, often mediation is spontaneous, it's unplanned, it's sometimes just subconscious, and it could depend on the child's, on their cultural practices, like what's okay for that family or what's okay for that parent, their own belief systems. So parents are already mediators. And one of the things that I always love to talk about is parent empowerment. So when we are helping parents understand how they need to help the child, I think it's important where they are already mediators to help them understand how could they mediate best, which will help their child, again, become an independent learner and a thinker. Looking at structural cognitive modifiability again, he looked at it, as a three-legged stool, where all the three legs were necessary for effective and stable modification, cognitive modification. And those three were, one is cognitive functions, the cognitive map, and then comes the mediated learning experience. So I'll just, like I said, we don't have enough time to run through all of it, in detail, but I'll just sort of give you some idea what we're talking about when we say cognitive map and cognitive functions. And, if you want to learn more about it, there's lots out there that I can help you with. So when we're talking about the cognitive map, which is, say, if the child's in an interaction with you or doing an activity, what's happening? What's going on during that entire interaction? So he looks at 7 aspects of the cognitive map. One is the content, which is the activity or the material or whatever you're doing. Second is the modality. So we all know some of our children are visual learners, some are auditory. So how do we present that information and stimuli to them? It could be gestures, it could be pictures, it could be verbal, symbolic, numeric, And the third is the phases, where what phase is, so this we will talk about more in the next slide, the input, elaboration, and output. So I'm going to leave that for now. The fourth one being the operations, which is more in terms of the mental processes going on. So for that activity, what does a child need to be able to do? So are we identifying, like, when we're doing labeling, or are they comparing, or are they categorizing? So what does a child need to do to get through with that activity, or, engage in that activity or that interaction? The level of complexity. So in terms of the this is more of a measure of problem solving in terms of how easy do we want to make the task, or how difficult, or how complex do we want to, how much do we want to keep increasing the complexity. And then comes a level of abstraction. Again, this is the measure of distance between how much the learner can understand more concrete information and whether they're able to start looking at abstract. So for a lot of our children with ASD, emotions are fairly abstract. When you say happy, how do you quantify or how do you get them? So we all understand happy, but it's really hard for them to, when you're trying to teach them happy, for them to make a connect with what happy means. So a lot of them, do have that struggle. So mediated learning experience has actually been a very good tool for us to, work on children who struggle with emotions and understanding emotions. In fact, one of the tools itself is identifying emotions. And then the level of efficiency in terms of how much time that does the child need, how much effort does the child need, and how much, how precise can the child engage in that activity. So these are the different, cognitive processes that goes on. And this was something that really, got me thinking a lot in terms of when we are doing an activity with the child, when we are engaging with the child, very often we're stuck. The child's just not getting it. The child's not understanding. We're modeling, we're doing all of these things. And when I learned about these cognitive functions, when I started looking at things from this, perspective, is when back then I was like, oh, it was one of those aha moments for me, because I was looking at it all wrong. That I needed to break it down in terms of what's happening with the child, what's happening with their entire activity, why is the child getting certain things and why is the child not getting certain things, why is something coming so easily, and why is the child needing constant repetition and drills for certain things. And then, like I said, I came across this cognitive functions when I was learning MLE. And this basically looks at three aspects. One is the input phase in terms of how are we taking in information when we are presented, whether it's toys or music or, a book or anything, or a person. How are we taking in that information? Do we have a clear perception of what's there? Are we able to label what we're seeing? So again, I will not go through all of it. You can sort of see it here. So I'm not going to describe it because, again, we don't have that much time. If we do have time at the end, and if you're interested, we can always go back to it. Are we able to take in two sources of information at the same time? How accurately and precisely am I, capturing that information that I've been presented? Like I said, it could be spellings, it could be puzzles, whatever it is. And once we know how this information has been taken in, what's going on out here, or rather in here? So what's going on at the elaborate phase, which is in terms of how the child is processing all that information. Are they able to define the problem in terms of, say, if it's puzzles, why are these two pieces not fixing in, what's happening over here? Are they able to select the relevant cues that, oh, the head needs to go down, and then, or they're the same color, so they go in together? Are they able to internalize it and create a picture in their minds? Are they able to visualize what they need to do, for that activity? Are they able to come up with a plan? Are they able to remember all that information? And again, we talked about the comparing and, categorizing. So there's so much internal processes that needs to happen before the output, which is before the child actually does something. And when the child's before the output, phase, is the child able to communicate or present that information back clearly, precisely, articulate, what the child wants to say? So, for example, with narrative skills, a lot of our children, not that they don't know the story or not that they, can't think of a story, but sometimes it's just that they don't know how to come back and tell you the story or come back and tell you what happened during the day at school. Are they able to use strategies and plans to eliminate all the trial and error? Like, they've tried different things. Again, going back to the puzzle example, they've, turned it around and twisted it around and shoving it in. And, but if they take a step back, come up with a plan, or what do I need to do? What's happening over here? And use all those cognitive, systems. And then you will see that the child be able to present a better output. Behavioral output as well, in terms of, are they able to stay calm? Are they able to handle anxiety? Are they able to present that, information in a clear manner? So I'll show you a few examples of this at the end from my work with children. So yeah, so we have the cognitive map, and then we have the cognitive functions, and then we have the mediated learning experience. So we do have 12 criteria. But the three main ones that we look at are the ones right in the center. So we have intentionality and reciprocity, we have meaning, and we have transcendence. And all of that is, building towards what you see outside, a feeling of belonging, a feeling of, or rather regulation of control and behavior, feeling of competence, sharing, individual and psychological differences, being able to understand them and their difference between them and people around them, goal seeking, planning, achieving behavior, the search for novelty and complexity, awareness of human as a changing entity, that people around us can change. Sometimes children with Asperger's syndrome have trouble understanding why their friends, are able to, they change so quickly. One day they're happy with them, or one day they're not happy with something that they said. So it's really hard for them when people keep changing around them. It's hard for them to keep up with that. Search for optimistic alternatives if they're doing something the same way, and that's not possible at that time to be able to make that shift. So we're looking at all of this, in the process of mediated learning experience. But let's look at the three main criterias, which was, like I said, intentionality and reciprocity, meaning, and transcendence. So when we talk about reciprocity and intentionality, so intentionality is basically now, very often for our sessions with children, we go in with a plan. We're very clear that this is what I want to do. Today's session, I have 40 minutes and I want to do, a game, a people game. I want to do, I want to do bubbles, or I want to do a puzzle, or I want to tell a story, or, I want to play this whatever game. So we go in with very clear intention of what that session is going to look like. But then does the child know that? Does the child, or do we make an effort to tell the child that this is what we plan for the day? This is what the plan for the activity is. Reciprocity is then the mediator's alertness and awareness of how the learner responds to that intent. Is the child interested in what we are interested? So I don't know if there's anyone here who's done Hanan, but I think, this may be one of those points where you're beginning to connect how Emily and Hanan and all sort of fall in place, that you're constantly making an effort to check in with the learner, whether they are with us in this, whether they're interested in what we're interested in, whether they want to do what we have in mind for them to do. So that intentionality is very, very important, and to be aware of the alertness and awareness of, how the learner is responding to that is also really important. And some of the three elements, that is involved in and influence this are, in terms of the mediator or the teacher or therapist, our language, our pace. Do we need to be really fast paced? If it's a child on low arousal, sensory arousal, we need to make things very exciting. But if the child's already very up there, either anxious or excited, and their arousal is up and high, we need to be more calm, and we need to make things, slow down the pace of what's going on. The pitch, our actions, all that we do to make that activity exciting for the child, and for the child to see that I also want to do this. And in terms of the learner or the student, their attention span, which is a challenge for many of the children we work with, and their availability in terms of, are they actively, cognitively present in the task? It's not that whether they're sitting with us, whether they're actually actively engaging in what and looking at what we are presenting to them. And of course, the stimulus, the material, the presentation of the material, or the activity and all of it, in terms of the intensity, in terms of how, whether it's a very easy one, whether it's a very challenging one, is it going to get the child very, is it going to make the child bored, or is it going to be too challenging that the child just doesn't want to do it and will phase off? So the intensity is also important. Repetition, sometimes it helps to repeat, sometimes the child doesn't want to repeat. So we need to constantly keep changing the way we present, keeping our main goal, so our goal can be that, I want the child to, engage in joint attention, right? So the goal can be the same, the activities can be a zillion. We can keep changing that, but then all that we're working towards is that, how do I build better joint attention with this child? So that was the intentionality. And then the second one is the meaning. Meaning is in terms of the mediator helping the child to acquire personal value. So how does it make sense for this child to do a puzzle? What does he get out of it? Is Is that even a priority for him to do a puzzle? So it has to make sense for the child to want to engage in the activity. It's just because we think it's a fantastic activity, just because we think that this is the best activity for him to learn this particular skill. If the child doesn't see a point in it, if the child doesn't see a purpose in it, then, like maybe an example of, writing skills. So sometimes you have, families who will say, oh, I make him do 2 pages of writing every day, or I make him copy it. Is that making sense for the child? Or do you think if we say, we're going to the store, how about we come up with a shopping list? What do you want to go and buy? And, or, it's somebody's birthday, we make a card, or let's set up a calendar and write down names of, all and put in the birthdays of all your, friends or cousins, and create a meaningful purpose for writing. So the meaning has to connect with the child. And this can be achieved through explicit teaching of cognitive skills, where the child is learning constant problem solving skills. So they see that, oh, if I learn this, it's useful for me in this particular context. And again, this can be verbal, non-verbal gestures. We can use any modality to help the child connect and make sense of the activity. According to Feuerstein, an effective mediator makes known to the child the significance of the interaction. Why are we learning this and what is it for? Again, not for someone else, not because, it makes sense for academic, for the child. Why are we learning this for you? What is it for in terms of reference to the learner or the child? And transcendence is when what we call as generalization. So that's pretty much transcendence. It refers to the attempts of the mediator to go beyond the immediate goals of interaction and to enable the child to apply all that the child's learning in different contexts, and start to think about how this connects to their real life and real life's experiences and situations and scenarios. The aspects that influence mediation of transcendence are finding general rules and patterns that apply to related, situations. So it's basically about going, beyond the here and now, and it helps the child to connect that, and which is where the meaning will also come in. That, oh, I do this, and this helps me for something else that I want to do, or something that I need to do. And you're starting to link that information across timelines of, about what happened yesterday, what we're doing now, and what might happen in the future. It helps for the child to reflect, which will in turn build a deeper understanding of, the activity or the material or the interaction. And thinking laterally, it's, about experiences, not just their experiences, maybe of their immediate family and friends. So we ask a lot of why questions, how questions. So it's not, again, maybe an example would be if you're doing, an activity and then the child's done it well. So often the tendency is that if the child does something wrong or not right, then we intervene. But if the child's done something well, we just keep moving on, or maybe a good job, or maybe, well done, or, good. But if we ask the why question, why does this and this go together? Or, how did you figure this out? Is the child able to articulate that? Is the child able to tell you that, oh, because say, if you're saying that this triangle and this triangle are the same, it's because they are the same size, or the same color. So are they able to use those words and vocabulary and language that they have inside to be able to explain and to be able to connect to what they did? So that's really important, that not just times when the child's done something, wrong, but also when they get something right, are they able to, so that gives us an opportunity to understand whether is it just by rote learning? Is he just, repeating something that he learned before, or did the child actually understand? And if he did, then our teaching has helped him to build a skill that is never going to regress, is never going to, go away. And he will use this to learn things on his own. We cannot practically teach everything to a child. The child has to start learning at some point, right? Sorry. So now, based on the structural cognitive modifiability, Professor Feuerstein came up with 3 aspects. So one is the learning propensity assessment device. This is the dynamic assessment, protocol that he came up with. Then he came up with the intervention tool, which is the instrumental enrichment program. And then he talked about something called shaping, modifying environment. So again, because of lack of time, we're just sort of going to quickly, run through this. So the learning propensity assessment tool, we have basic and standard. I'm just going to give a quick example. I don't know if many of you are familiar with this. This is also, it's used in other psychological tests as well. So we will test this in 4 ways. So first, this image is presented to the child, and the child does a standard copy. So, you just give it to them. They can't turn the paper around. They can't, move it. They cannot erase. They need to just hold it and copy it exactly as it is. And then, after about 3 to 4 minutes of diverting the child's attention with other things, we ask them to do a standard immediate copy. So we ask them to just, recall. So we just give them a plain sheet, and we ask them to try and remember the information that, or the image, and whatever they remember of the image, they need to draw. And then comes the mediation. So I'll show you what the mediation is like. And post-mediation, we do another structured copy. And again, we do a delayed recall. I should have, taken pictures of some of the work of the children. It's amazing in terms of what children start with and what they end with. And this test, for example, the areas it tests is attention, visual, spatial, memory, planning, working memory, executive functions, which is something that we often, find a huge challenge working on, executive functions. So the mediation, let's see again quickly if maybe just some answers in the chat box. Having talked about all that we said, how would you mediate? How would you help the child understand this image and help the child to know or come up with a way in which he can, copy this or recall or, draw this image as accurately as possible? Can we just throw out some responses in the chat box? Why do I not see the chat box? What could you tell the child? So the child's drawn the image. It's completely off. It looks nothing like this. And maybe a few details for immediate, copy. But in the recall, the child's just not, he's just randomly drawn a few things. Now you need to do the mediation. Given all that we talked about, just a rough idea. What might you say to the child? Sleeping line, good try. What else would you tell the child? Yeah, Dali says, first we need to see if the cognitive ability of the child matches this task. Yes, there are many variations of this as well. This is the standardized, ROCF, but then there are a few simplified versions. So we will use one that is, suitable for the child. How many circles, triangles, square, and name the shapes, rectangles. Yes. Okay, what else? Now, when you look at this image, right, what comes to your mind in terms of how would you connect any of this to what you see in your real world? Does it look like anything? Yeah. What does it look like? Face, you see a face. What else? Nothing else? No one else sees a face? House, a rocket, aeroplanes with boxes, maze, horizontal temple, button, antenna. Yeah, unfortunately, there are not many antennas now, so it's hard to explain that to children. But yeah, antenna is something that we grew up seeing. Kite, right? So we are starting to pull out all this vocabulary and language that this child has. And these are answers that we pull out from the child. It's not something we will tell the child, see, do you see this? Or see, do you see that? You're starting to get the child to connect with this drawing in a way that makes sense to him. So if he knows lines, then yes, horizontal, vertical, sleeping. And if, he knows shapes, then we would look at all of the different shapes. We would talk about angles, or we would talk about parallel lines. And we would also talk about how does this connect to the child's real life. Have you seen something like this, at home? Or have you seen something like this at school? Or have you seen something? So the child starts thinking about this design rather than just looking at it as a visual, material that he needs to reproduce. So the child starts, when you're engaging the child to look at it, he by default has to look at it more, because now he needs to find things that he can connect to. So he's paying more attention. We start looking at maybe seeing if we can help the child to segregate it into parts, and look at how he can try and remember the information. So maybe the number of lines, or maybe in terms of left, right, and up and down. So we start to use language, which is again the cognition, and which is something that all of us work on. We try and pull out what the child already has, use their past experience, and then we move on to whether the child is now able to reproduce that information. So for the next one, right, let's just quickly do an activity. I'm going to drink a little bit of water. I'd love for everyone to get on the chat box and give me some answers for this one. So I'm going to read a set of words. I'm going to read a whole set, listen to it, and see how many of it you can recall. So whatever words you recall, just put it out there, okay? Pants, carrot, sharpener, horse, dress, tomato, pen, dog, shirt, cucumber, pencil, cat, skirt, pepper, eraser, mouse. You have 10 seconds. Can you all start writing whatever words you all heard? Just throw it out there. You're getting some responses. Let me know if you want me to read it once more. We usually do it a couple of times, at least 4, not more than 4, but for the lack of time, I'm okay to do it once more. Okay, shall I? Pants, carrot, sharpener, horse, dress, tomato, pen, dog, shirt, cucumber, pencil, cat, skirt, pepper, eraser, mouse. Where Marilyn Matthew got quite a few words. Anyone else? Okay. So how would you, if you had to mediate this for a child, or rather, if you want me to mediate, what should I do to help you remember the words better? What can I do for you? Categorize it, yes. Excellent speech language pathology. So how would you categorize it? Look at the words, and how would you categorize it? What are the categories we have? Repeated, someone said repeated presentation, categorize, associate, by function. Okay. Yeah, sorry, someone started to talk. What are the categories? Vegetables, clothes, animals, and stationery, right? So we have 4 categories and we have 4 words each. Do you want me to read it once more and then see if you can try and remember someone else apart from, Marlon? Pants, carrot, sharpener. Don't cheat and look at the chat box. Pants, carrot, sharpener, horse, dress, tomato, pen, dog, shirt, cucumber, pencil, cat, skirt, pepper, eraser, and mouse. Has it become easier for you to now, lump the words into categories and start to make those associations? Has it become, yeah, someone says yes. Was it still challenging for anyone? And if it was still challenging, what else can I do? It's easier. Relatively easier. Yeah, obviously we had to rush through the mediation and the presentation. So, we didn't have time to do it the way it would have otherwise been done. So this is the other, so there are quite a few tests that we do, 14 tests that we do with LPAD, Learning Propensity Assessment Device. This is one of the other ones, which is a 16-word memory test. Latency period about 10 seconds. Like I said, we present the words about 10 seconds. We do maximum of 4 repetitions, and then we start to mediate. We do not offer any mediation for the first 3 or 4 repetitions. What we're also observing, is the subject spontaneous, whether the child is on his own before mediation, starting to understand that these are categories, and maybe starting to already, when they're recalling, putting them into categories, grouping them in categories. And after about 4 repetitions, then mediation is offered. And if needed to encourage the memory process, we use various cues. So maybe a mnemonic, or maybe something that cognitive, in terms of getting them to think about, again, connecting this to their own experience. And then we try and get them to recall it again. So again, because of lack of time, I'm just running to 2, but I'm hoping you get the idea that even with the assessment, what we're looking at is, if we present the material to the child in a way that the child can understand, relate to, and think about, is there a difference in the way the child will, engage in that test or our task after mediation, which means the child, we're looking at the child's learning propensity. And then comes the intervention, which is the cognitive curriculum that Professor Feuerstein came up with, where we utilize mediated learning, and we're looking at developing fundamental cognitive skills required for learning. So we have a whole lot of tools that you see, and we have goes through ages 3 to 10 years, and then from 10 years through adulthood. So again, we don't have the time to look at all of it, but I just want to sort of show you what some of it looks like. So for example, you see this is called the organization of dots. So you have a picture, you have an image, and you have these frames. And the first one has the square and the triangle. So this is basic, which means for the younger children. So the image is very, very basic in terms of a square and a triangle. And as these dots present themselves in every frame, you see the complexity increasing. The orientation could change. They could start to superimpose. What the child needs to do is connect the 4 dots and the 3 dots to form a square and a triangle without turning the paper around. They need to hold it still. So what we're looking at is, if the child is able to define the problem, whether they're able to select the dots relevant to the figure in terms of, referring back to the sample figure. What is their planning behavior like? What is their hypothetical thinking? Are they able to think about the fact that, oh, yes, there are 4 and there's, 3, maybe it's turned around, maybe it's, one inside the other. And are they able to, summative behavior in terms of, are they able to explain to you what they had to do? In fact, interestingly, the higher version of this was something that we used to use at 5 for our recruitment process. So when we had, therapists coming for interviews, I used to use the sheets, at least, one of the sheets, the orientation of dots, because it gave me information about, is this person open to change? Is this person somebody who will, be able to accept when they're stuck, when they're not able to? Will they take in information from the team, because we do it always as a group activity? Will they take in ideas from others? Because when we're mediating in a group, you learn from others, you gain their experience as well. So you use all that information, and then you try to problem solve again. Again, this is orientation in space in terms of basic. No time, so I'm just going to run through it. Remember, we talked about emotions, and then we moved to empathy to action with the older children. So you see how for younger children, the orientation of space is more, pictorial. And as we progress, we have, more line drawings, illustrations, and we have all sorts of, a whole list of. So that's, of course, the particular curriculum of instrumental enrichment, but the entire concept can be used in all the work that we do. Coming to the third one, so we talked about learning propensity, the assessment device, the curriculum, and then, the third one, which was shaping, modifying environment. So SME is more in terms of, how we design our environments, whether it's therapy center or home or school, and we organize it to promote cognitive modifiability, where the child comes into that environment being able to learn and not comes into that environment where they feel they have to do something because that's what's, like they cannot get out of the room unless I finish. Right. So many of our children will complete the task because they know there's no other way out. I just have to finish the task and go out. And that's often when we also see the, case of in the therapy center, he's doing well or she's doing well. But then when the child goes back home, mom's not able to get the child to do the same thing, or the mom's not seeing the same skill back at home. So we need to design our environment to promote learning, to promote cognitive modifiability, to promote more thinking from the child. So for example, this is from one of our centers in Chennai. And the person you see there working with the child is, in fact, the special educator. So while it looks like an OT room, this is used by a special educator, of course, in consultation. And, we work, because we worked as a team, it helped us get, learn from other professionals. So for this child, she was a child who had, she's, a verbal child on the autism spectrum. That's the mom with her. She loved numbers, as in she knew numbers, but then she just wouldn't use. She had this aversion towards, anytime she heard numbers, she would throw a tantrum, or she would throw, and that was becoming a problem at school. So it's not that she didn't know the numbers. So just to get her excited about numbers, and she's one of those children who love to move and do things. So then, in consultation with OT, of course, she loved this rock climbing, indoor rock climbing thing we had. We started using numbers to climb in terms of, 1 or 2, we would name the ones that she's climbing on. So we started to use numbers and fit in numbers into something that she liked to do. And from there, we slowly started to work. So again, obviously I'm oversimplifying it now for, because of time, but you get what I'm saying, right? So an environment doesn't have to be a very teaching environment. It has to be a learning environment where the child is able to learn and use that information to learn more on their own. Again, I wanted to share a quick example of something that we all do. We do storytelling. So this is story cubes, if some of you are familiar with it. So we have dice, and there's images on everyone, each, dice. So we roll it, we put it out, and then whatever comes on top, it can be silly, it can be, whatever the child looks at, or connects that image to, we will accept it, and the child has to make a story. So this is before mediation, where the child looked at these images, and I don't know if you is it zooming it? Can you? This is the story he wrote. The boy in the city, he was telling the Z, because you see, he looked at that and he said Z very loudly, because the key was lost in the 17th April. So he got mixed up in terms of the date that day by opening the key with the cupboard. So again, quickly, how would you mediate? If you can just throw some ideas, what would you get the child to think about? If you want the child to develop a more organized story, how would you help this child using mediation as we learned it now? Any ideas? Just throw some ideas around. So in your practice, how do you help children develop their stories? No? Present picture cards, ask to sequence. Okay. Yeah, so we got some direction there, right? I'm sure all of you do a lot. It's just this format of interacting may not be the most ideal. So I get that. We ask them to say something about the picture and then try connect what they say to a person. Yes. So all of that, right? And we get them to look at the images, we get them to think about what they see. Have they seen something like this before? You know, again, maybe labeling it and what does it look like? And also helping the child understand that, you know, with the story, there's a beginning and then there's something that happens and maybe there's some problem that happened and then there's a solution and maybe a consequence. So again, because of time, you know, it's oversimplifying the mediation, but we spend a lot of time on getting the child to talk about the story and build the story in a way that makes sense to them, and think about an order in the story. Why does the story need to have an order? You know, why is it important for the child, for, you know, something to, why does this have to be this and why does this have to be this? There's again never right and wrong answers. So the story can be silly, it can be, you know. So right now we're just working on getting the child to start connecting the parts of, you know, the pictures to form a story. Okay. So this is post mediation. It's a different set of pictures because the child didn't want to follow, you know, do the same one. So are you able to see the story here? I'll show you the images first. A face, a house, a fire, a turtle. Like I said, the child can call it anything. A flower, again, a mask, a book, an apple, and a castle. So this is what the child said. The boy is sad because his house, very small, he chose to strike that off. The boy is sad because his house is on fire. His pet turtle died in the fire. You see the connection? His flower also died in the fire. And then the thief was stealing. He made the mask into a thief, was stealing the books and food, the apple. And he got caught in the fire and the police came and put him in prison. So there's some, you know, connection starting to build. He's starting to, you know, think about how the fact that all of those images have to be part of the story, and, you know, there is a sequence into it, and then how all of it is interconnected. This one again, I wanted to show one at a time, but if you see on the right side, this is this image, and that's the first time the child did this. He had to, you know, he likes comics, so we started to build on dialogues around comic strips. So on the right, all he did was just, you know, just write words. So he looked at the boy holding his ear, so he wrote here. The girl was tapping him, so he thought maybe the girl wants to say that I'm here. Or no, for the second one, you see arm. She's pointing to arm. So you see weak central coherence here, not being able to take the larger picture and only looking at specific information. And in the fourth one, you see that you know, she's opening her mouth, so he writes screen. And on the left, you see the one post mediation. Again, it's not perfect, but at least now he's understood that it has to be a dialogue. It has to be something that they say. So he says, I am sitting on glass, not grass, which is fine. I can raise my hand to the moon. Excuse me. And why am I crying? The sweat actually, he thought is tears. But you see the progression, you see that where the child slowly moving into making more meaningful connects. I wanted to do this activity with you, but unfortunately we don't have the time. So I think we'll have to leave it at there. I'd like to end with this, where I'm sure all of you know this and believe this, but I just wanted to again share this quote by Professor Feurenstein, where it said, it is our duty to find the strength in every person. And this is not just for the children we work with, it's also the families that we work with. So when we are working with families and supporting families to help their child, we need to be able to mediate with them as well. We need to do all of this mediated learning that I talked about with children, also with our families, because they also come with all these different baggages and emotions and, you know, challenges. So from counseling, we need to move to mediation, even with the families that we work with. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I think I'm okay on time. 1 minute. So if you don't want to ask questions now and you want to know something or you want literature, then you can, you know, reach out to me and I can share stuff about information about mediated learning experience with you. So I know it was very rushed, but maybe it was a bit too much, or it was overwhelming, or maybe I did not I was not able to articulate it as best as I wanted to, but I hope you sort of got an idea of, what mediated learning is all about. And I hope that you will go and explore it a little more. You don't have to really go and do the LPD or the IE. If you can, great. But at least the concept of mediated learning experience can be used across our work with the children and families. So thank you.
Thank you, Sowmya. I think we'll just wait. Anybody, I mean, if there are any queries, you could just put it in the chat box, or you can unmute your mic and ask Sowmya the questions.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Ma'am, I would like to know, like, what are the children's IQ level, or like, what is the background of the children that they visit you, that you do the MLE on?
Emily, that's the beauty of it. And that's what we talked about earlier on in terms of structured cognitive modifiability. We don't test IQ. There is no score-based testing that we do. Wherever the child's at, we start at that level. It's for everyone of all intellectual abilities.
Can you tell a little about like 2 or 3 cases, children that comes to you for this?
Okay, so like what I showed in the image over there, the one with the comic strip is a boy who is 12. He's on the autism spectrum. He started off with he was verbal, but again, only single words, very need based. While we knew that he had the capability and he had very good comprehension and very good, understanding of everything that was going around, and he was just not seeing the need to use, build his verbal expression. He was quite happy with just using single words, just saying one word at a time, or just so he was stuck there for a long time, and the family came to me, eventually. And then we started exploring things that would make sense to him. We started exploring activities that he sort of might like. So he has his obsession for movies, and he has his obsession for comics, and he has his obsession for, Peppa Pig. So we started using all of that to build on his, narrative skills. And it really worked. Again, like I said, we don't have enough time to run through the whole thing, so it might sound like I'm oversimplifying it. But when we started to connect the information to what he likes and, wants to know or do more about, then you could see the change that was coming from within him. And again, instead of telling him what he's doing wrong, if we started to build his awareness about what's going on and what's expected and, what the activity is all about. So building that intentionality, building that meaning and transcendence. He loved school. He loved, just being around children. So we started using a lot of those experiences because he just couldn't communicate with them, but he really enjoyed being around peers. And he had a huge challenge in school because he did have behavioral challenges where he would, scream, which is more out of excitement of being in the playground with children, but it would scare other children and they would run away from him. So that's one of the children who I used mediated learning experience with.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
You're most welcome.
Sowmya, I have a question. Maybe I might have not understood it correctly, but in one of your slides, you have mentioned that it starts at the age of 3 onwards. But when we understand MLE, I do understand you. I mean, I don't think age is a criteria here, right?
For that instrument, for instrumental enrichment, because it's more worksheet based, it start at 3. But the concept of mediated learning experience can, it is from day 1.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah, hi.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, myself Sowmya. And ma'am, you stated in a slide that parents are the direct mediators or the first mediators. So, ma'am, if a child who is in a joint family has a relatively greater advantage of being in a more diverse environment, or like he has more models. So, ma'am, as we meet majority of the patients today, the kids today, majority of them have a nuclear family.
Okay.
Ma'am, what are the some finer points that we should keep in mind in counseling the parents who who live in a nuclear family, ma'am?
See, the thing is with, while yes, joint family systems are wonderful because the child, is exposed to a lot more than in a nuclear family setting. There have also been cases where because the child's in a joint family and there's too many children around, this child's been ignored, or, the symptoms have not been picked up, or this is everyone speaking. I have children of my own family who, started speaking really late because everyone's at, in their place talking all the time, and the child just never got a chance to use, his language. So it could be both ways. So whether it's nuclear family or, the joint family, I think it's more in terms of how we work around what the existing family dynamics, because you can't tell a family that, where it's just mom, dad and child, this is how it has to be. There is ideal scenario and then there's practical. So this is what it is, that both the parents are working and they have to work to be able, because therapy is expensive, it's long term. You can't tell the family, mom or dad, anyone, quit and sit with the child and work. So if they need, and that's what they, their family dynamics is, we work around what is practically possible for the family. And whatever interactions they have, whether it's morning brushing, time, or they taking the child to school, there's some interaction time with the family. We use those interaction times to and help the family in terms of how do you mediate during those times. And of course, find ways in which we can fill the gap. So if there is, play dates, or if they have cousins around, or if they have neighbors around, or some, friends who can be uncles and aunts. So we have to try and work around what the family has and presents to us. We cannot tell them that this is how it should be, and, this is what you should be doing, because it just becomes, then the family goes back thinking, oh no, this is how it should be, and I can't provide that for my child. So we have to work around what's, available for the family. I don't know if it answers your question though.
Yeah, ma'am, I understood. I got the point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sowmya, there's a question on the chat box. I'll just read it because I think it is applicable to others too. Kantima wants to know, where can I read more on MLE?
Okay, yeah. So there's this whole lot of multiple links. So Kantima, if you just email me and tell me, you know Diana, right, Kantima? Yeah. So yeah, either you can ask her, or you can. She's trained with us as well in IE, but you can just email me or message me, and I will send you information that's specific to what you're looking at.
Sowmya, maybe you can try adding it onto the chat box also for the larger audience, on at least few links that they could start looking at.
So is there a yeah?
Can you do that? Or
ICLP, which is the International Center. They are changing the website now. So otherwise, that was one go-to place. So because they're in the process of making that change, even we are stuck with not having a particular website. So there's quite a bit. I can share, maybe if Namita has their contacts, then I can share some documents to Namita and she can send them out to the participants.
Sure, you can do that.
Registered with their email IDs, right?
Yes.
I can share a few documents which are very most simple. I should have thought of it. I'm sorry. I should have thought of having a few links, ready to share. But I can make that available.
No issues. I think what you can do is type in your email ID. I think there was an email ID in the last slide, but you can just do it on the chat box too, or you can open up the last screen so that people who would like to connect with you can connect with you directly through your email.
I thought my screen is still. You can't see my screen?
Yeah, it is there.
It's
Yeah.
visible,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes.
the email ID is there on the screen along with your contact number. Yeah, thank you.
So if you email me or get in touch with me via WhatsApp, then I can share the information.
And for all others, this is a recorded session, so it is there on Isha website. So in case you want to revisit this presentation, you can go back and do that. All right, so if there are no more questions, we will wind up the session today. Thank you, Sowmya, for...
Thank you to Isha and the special interest group and Namita for, giving me this chance, because like I said, not after Hannon, Emily, in fact, pulled me towards Hannon. So mediated learning experience is something that more so because it really changed the way I look at everything now, and it maybe changed me in a long if you look at it in that perspective. So it's something that I really think will have an impact once you start looking at it, and I would really like for you to have that same kind of experience and aha moment as I had.
Very rightly said, Sowmya. I think as we move forward in our intervention program, I think the focus gets a little off track onto purely on language rather than looking at the cognitive processes involved. And many a times we have to remind ourselves back, to look back at the cognitive processes and then work on language, because cognition and language goes so very hand in hand.
Yeah.
And as you rightly put it at the end, it is our duty to find the strength in every person, and that means in every family. So I think it's so much easier once you understand how do you go about it, and all the other goals just falls into its place. So definitely, thank you, Sowmya. Thank you, Isha, for this wonderful opportunity, and thank you all the participants who participated today on, as Sowmya said, on a weekend. And hope you all have a great weekend and a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sowmya. It was a great presentation.
Thank you, Namita. And yeah, I'm quite eager to see, what more SIG has to offer.
So to all those who are still here, SIG is in the process of conducting many more such interactive sessions. So please drop in a mail in case you're looking at any specific topics. But there are a few topics already lined up. And if you are a part of the Isha group or any of the alumni group, you should be able to get this information. If you're not, maybe, and if you got this information through any of your contacts, come join the Isha website, Isha group on Facebook or Isha group on the WhatsApp, Telegram groups, and keep yourself updated on the upcoming programs.
Okay, I think I'll also sign off.
Yes, thank you once again. Bye-bye.